Howdy, folks. I'm going to try to give folks a little bit of insight about what's wrong with the courts today. More and more people seem to be waking up that, wait a minute, the court's interfering with these travel bans. I mean, whether you agree with it or not is irrelevant. As far as the law is concerned, Trump does have the constitutional authority as president to try to protect the country. Okay? And the law he's trying to enforce has been around since 1952, and several presidents have enforced that law with no problem. Okay? Several Democrats too. But when Trump tries to enforce it, all of a sudden there's a problem. All right? No, it's not. Trump's not the problem. It's the courts. They're corrupt. Okay? Anyway, there's a saying that's been floating around on Facebook and Twitter for a while, attributed to St. Augustine, and there's a picture of a lion there. Looks good, a symbol of strength. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself. And yeah, I can agree with that to a certain degree. But what if the truth is bitter? What if the truth is unpleasant? So I would submit whether the truth is a lion or not depends upon the nature of the truth. Yeah, you see, if the truth is bitter and unpleasant and it goes against what you've been mentally conditioned to believe in all your life, or what you want to believe in, here's what my saying is. Bitter truth is like a skunk. Stinks like hell, and most people will run away from it. I think there's a lot of truth to that. So anyway, folks, let's discuss what's wrong with the courts. And it's not going to be pleasant. It's going to be bitter. See, now the federal courts, and I'm going to read from my homemade teleprompter. Hope y'all don't mind. The federal court striking down Trump's travel bans is just the tip of the iceberg. The federal judiciary is not an independent branch of government. It hasn't been so for 8 decades, when Franklin Roosevelt attacked and packed the federal courts and the Supreme Court during the New Deal of the 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s. I just read through the old press articles from that period in our history on my website. Old weekly press table of contents, folks. A lot of information there. I took a lot of time doing this research and putting it on there. The courts are primarily Democratic Socialist politicians wearing black robes. They're there to advance the interests of the Democratic Socialist Party. Now, the reason for striking down Trump's travel ban is obvious. It's votes. The Democratic Socialists have been losing elections lately. People who've lived in the United States for generations are losing faith in the Democratic Socialist Party. A lot of them are. That's why Trump won the election. So they need new voters. Hence why they want to flood the country with all these immigrants, and also to allow illegal immigration to continue. Now, I've known for years the reason the Democratic Socialists allow illegal immigrants into the country is to eventually make voters out of them, millions of new voters. They'll almost all vote Democrat, and they'll train their offspring to do the same. See, they know what they're doing. Hence, we can expect that once the wall is about to be built on the southern border with Mexico, there is a strong presumption that the federal judges in the courts will intervene and block that too. I submit to you they will. When the legislation that repeals and replaces Obamacare is signed into law by President Trump, there is a strong presumption that the federal courts will intervene and strike it down. It's the nature of the beast, folks. I submit to you they're going to do this. Now listen to this. In June of last year, there was an interesting article that I found. Okay, and there was a judge in the federal 7th Circuit, Richard Posner. Here's what he said last year. I see absolutely no value to a judge of spending decades, years, months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, or seconds studying the Constitution, the history of its enactment, its amendments, and its implementation. He said that. And this guy is a federal circuit court judge. And I submit to you there's a lot more of these federal judges that have the same way of thinking Posner does. Why are they on the bench? That statement alone should have been justification to impeach that guy and get him off the federal courts. He's there to uphold the Constitution, not to say, hey, screw the Constitution, let's do what we want. And you see, the Senate not impeaching him tells me the Senate ain't really much better than the judges. I guess they must have the same frame of mind. But they can't admit it because they got to get votes. Yeah, yeah. Got to look good and sound good to get votes, right? Anyway, to further show how corrupt the courts are, let me share some of the fruits of my legal and historical research. Now, not long after the Civil War in 1886, the case of Boyd versus United States was handed down by the Supreme Court. In this case, the court said it was the duty of judges or the courts to be watchful of the constitutional rights of the citizen and any stealthy encroachments thereon. Now, this was a time when the right to free labor was upheld in the law, and your right to contract your labor and keep your wages in full was considered a sacred right. Now, just 2 years prior to the Boyd case, Justice Field, in one of the slaughterhouse cases, this is what he wrote in his judicial opinion. Listen to this, folks. As in our intercourse with our fellow men, certain principles of morality are assumed to exist without which society would be impossible. So certain inherent rights lie at the foundation of all action, and upon a recognition of them alone can free institutions be maintained. These inherent rights have never been more happily expressed than in the Declaration of Independence, that new evangel of liberty to the people. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that is, so plain that their truth is recognized upon their mere statement, that all men are endowed, not by edicts of emperors, or decrees of parliament, or acts of Congress, but by their Creator, with certain inalienable rights. That is, rights which cannot be bartered away, or given away, or taken away, except in punishment of crime. It's important. And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And to secure these, not grant them, but secure them, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, among these inalienable rights, as proclaimed in that great document, is the right of men to pursue their happiness, by which is meant the right to pursue any lawful business or vocation in any manner not inconsistent with the equal rights of others, which may increase their prosperity or develop their faculties so as to give them the highest enjoyment. The common businesses and callings of life, the ordinary trades and pursuits, which are innocuous in themselves, have been followed in all communities and from time immemorial, must therefore be free in this country to all alike upon the same conditions. The right to pursue them without let or hindrance, except that which is applied to all persons of the same age, sex, and condition, is a distinguishing privilege of citizens of the United States and an essential element of that freedom which they claim as their birthright. Now listen to this. It has been well said that the property which every man has in his own labor, yeah, your labor is property, people, as it is the original foundation of all other property. Yeah, your car, your home, all other property you have, if not for your labor, if not for your ability to labor and earn wages and pay for it, you wouldn't have it, would you? No. So it is the most sacred and inviolable. Yeah, that right to labor is sacred. The patrimony of the poor man lies in the strength and dexterity of his own hands, and to hinder his employing his strength and dexterity in what manner he thinks proper, without injury to his neighbor, is a plain violation of this most sacred property. It is a manifest encroachment upon the just liberty both of the workman and of those who might be disposed to employ them or employ him, as it hinders the one from working at what he thinks proper, so it hinders the others from employing whom they think proper. Now, the practice of masters determining the allowance slaves received from their wages was abolished after the Civil War by virtue of the 13th Amendment. And the 16th Amendment, people, and I've learned this from my research, has been perverted to negate the 13th Amendment. but I doubt you'll find one judge in the federal courts from the Supreme Court on down that will admit the truth in that. And the same goes for the politicians, people in the media, the press, the professors of the colleges. All of them. Yeah. In short, the Democratic Socialists, since the New Deal began 8 decades ago, have achieved to a high degree what your mind is fed from the cradle to the grave. It's a form of brainwashing the Nazis called Gleichschaltung. See? It worked very efficiently on the German people. They didn't even have television. Yeah. And it's worked very efficiently here in America too. It's worked. Yeah, it works. You see, folks, all the 13th Amendment did was to bar the politicians from direct access to your labor or your wages. People who work for wages are supposed to have the right to receive their wages in full. They are supposed to pay their taxes indirectly when they spend their money as consumers. And the only way power over labor can lawfully be exercised by the politicians is if it's punishment for crime after conviction. Remember what Justice Fields said? Your inalienable rights that are guaranteed by the Declaration of Independence, they can only be taken away if it's punishment for crime after conviction. Yeah. You see, there's some due process that needs to be respected here, but is it? Is it? Yeah. And when it comes to all this immigration and stuff, oh, these people, they deserve to have due process. Yeah, well, what about your due process when it comes to taking your labor away? You don't have that, do you? No. Anyway, we the people have been duped again by deceitful politicians and judges. But there again, this has all happened before. As King Solomon said long ago, there is nothing new under the sun. Yeah. You see, folks, power over labor, power over people's wages, or slavery, it's old. It's very, very old. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what form it takes, the slaves will only receive the allowance from their wages their masters choose to give them. It's the way it's always been. Now, this is not the way the income tax was sold to the people in 1913 when the 16th Amendment became part of the Constitution. Once again, go to the old weekly press table of contents and read the income tax. Article entitled The Income Tax by Benton McMillan from, I think it was May of 1913. He was a 10-term congressman from Tennessee. He'll explain what the income tax was supposed to be. And you'll see it's been perverted. You see, it was sold to the people as a tax upon the gains and profits of wealthy people and large corporations. It wasn't sold as a tax upon wages. And for 23 years after 1913, the wages of working people were not taxed. You know, less than 3% of the people were obligated to pay income tax for 23 years after it began. It was Franklin D. Roosevelt and his Democratic Socialist cult. That's what they were, and that's what they still are. But they perverted the income tax to begin taxing wages at 1% starting in 1937. Now most people, having been born into the wage tax system and having numbers assigned to them at birth, that's partus sequitur ventrum, people. That's an old slave maxim. It's applied to all institutions of slavery throughout history. They lay claim upon the labor of the child at birth. The offspring follows the condition of the mother. You can find it in the Dred Scott case. Anyway, since they've been born into it, they look upon the system as legal and they faithfully pay income tax and allow their masters to take from their labor all the labor they want to any level they want with no limitations or restraints. And the courts uphold it and deny there's any slavery involved in it. Aren't socialists wonderful people? Aren't they great? Yeah. Yeah. They're very efficient at gaining control of what people's minds are fed so they can brainwash people into accepting their de facto system. That's what they're doing. See, the judges in any deceitful system like this, think about this. They'll be corrupt. They're not going to have any respect from the truth, are they? Well, of course not. They'll rule in the interests of their political party while claiming they're upholding the Constitution. That's exactly what they're doing, aren't they? Let's take the example of Cheek versus the United States from the 1991 term of the Supreme Court. See, I methodically went through the Supreme Court reporters back in the 1990s trying to find the first case where a wage earner stood before the Supreme Court. I didn't find it until the 1991 term. And this guy had been criminally prosecuted in the district court. And he was an airline pilot, so his wages were way up there at the top of the scale, but still he was a wage earner. Okay? Listen to what the court said in this case. Listen to this. It is common ground that this court, where possible, interprets congressional enactments so as to avoid raising serious constitutional questions. Yeah, so much for the court that's going to look out for your constitutional rights. What the court's saying here, basically, is that, okay, if there's a serious constitutional question involved or your people's rights are being violated, well, we'll just interpret things in such a way to pronounce it legal and avoid it. Isn't that nice of them? Yeah, you don't have an independent judiciary anymore that defends your rights. It's gone, folks. And it all started back with FDR and that damn New Deal, with all that socialism that got forced into our system without amending the Constitution. Just read the stuff on my website. Don't take my word for it. Anyway, folks, now you have an idea what's wrong with the courts. You know, you have a bunch of judges that they have these socialist mentalities and they just don't have any respect for the truth. That's just the way it is. That's why Trump's going to have such a big problem with them. Yeah. Anyway, folks, nothing is more dangerous and insidious than people with master's degrees and PhDs waging war against the truth. Yeah, people like this control the education of your kids. It's not good. These types of people endeavor to be masters of deceit, masters of deception. And it's up to us, we the people, to see through their deception and frustrate their efforts.